Let's start cutting line this way. And then we're going to take hose to you.
This is all I got. When the flames come over here, I'll get out of here.
This is a Fox News alert. New wildfires erupting in Southern California. You're looking live at pictures of the Laguna fire, which is now burning in Camarillo, California, outside of Oxnard. The fire was reported just before 9 o'clock local time, so just about an hour ago, LA time.
The fire right now is burning about 2 acres in Ventura County. We're going to be monitoring this and the latest with the Hughes fire when we speak with the Los Angeles County Fire Department. That will happen in just a few moments. We'll get an update.
This is about ensuring the citizenship, a cornerstone of our national identity.
This executive order is not only going to be burdensome, it is ludicrous and it's unconstitutional.
The days of illegal immigrants demanding the same rights and benefits of American citizens are over.
I'd like to remind Donald Trump that the United States became the most powerful, most prosperous nation on earth, not in spite of immigrants, but because of them.
This isn't just about immigration, people. This is about defending our sovereignty, respecting the rule of the law.
A legal battle over birthright citizenship underway in a Seattle courtroom. A federal judge is hearing arguments from 4 states suing to block President Trump's executive order. This as Republicans on Capitol Hill introduce a bill to restrict birthright citizenship. And so we begin on a Thursday afternoon. I'm John Roberts in Washington. Good to see you again, Sandra.
All right, great to be with you, John. I'm Sandra Smith in New York. This is America Reports. In total, 22 states and 2 cities are suing. The challenges could become lengthy battles, legal battles, that is, that end up before the Supreme Court.
We have got constitutional attorney and Professor Jonathan Turley on deck to talk about this.
But first, let's get to David Sputt. He's live at the Justice Department for us. So, David, what is the state of Washington asking for here?
Well, Sandra and John, the state of Washington, through the Attorney General, wants a temporary restraining order, essentially a stop from this executive order signed by President Trump on Monday, a stop from it to going into effect. Now, a Justice Department attorney is in Seattle right now. Our producer, Lee Ross, in the courtroom, going to be sending notes from this hearing. And this DOJ attorney is going to be arguing for the judge to allow this executive order to go through as President Trump signed it. That's what we're going to be hearing from the DOJ. Now, this all deals with the whole idea of birthright citizenship. That means a child born in the United States, even if the parents are illegal immigrants, that child would get citizenship. Republicans announced their bill, but even if Congress passes this bill and President Trump signs a law ending birthright citizenship, well, it won't just end like that. The reason, it's part of the U.S. Constitution, Sandra, specifically the 14th Amendment. It dates back to 1868, 3 years after the Civil War. Specifically Reconstruction, and changing the Constitution won't happen even with a law to change the U.S. Constitution. 2/3 of both the House and Senate would need to sign off, and 3/4 of the state legislatures would need to agree. That's the way to change it. However, Sandra, if President Trump signs this into law, the Supreme Court may just be interested to hear arguments, and eventually the justices, though they can't change the Constitution, of course, their weight would add to the conversation. That's where we are right now. This hearing's kicking off. It's expected to last a couple of hours, and as you mentioned, this is part of 4 states that Washington signed onto. Then there's another lawsuit making its way through Massachusetts with 18 different states and 2 cities. Sandra?
All right, David, live at the Justice Department for us. Thank you. John?
All right, Sandra, let's bring in Jonathan Turley, constitutional law professor, George Washington University, and a Fox News contributor. Let's put up the map on the screen so that folks at home can follow along. 22 states in total are taking the Trump administration to court over this end of birthright citizenship. I assume that this is going to end up in the Supreme Court at some point, which I assume is Donald Trump's intention.
Oh, I think you really put your finger on what's really going on here. This executive order is the most vulnerable, arguably, of all of the executive orders that were issued. Here, the Trump administration is really the underdog. The odds are strongly against it prevailing. But this has been a long-standing debate ironically, since the language was first approved, when this language was still on the floor of the Senate, there were people that contributed to it, that helped draft it, that said that it does not grant birthright citizenship. The problem is the language of the amendment is a model of clarity at both ends. It basically says that if you are born or naturalized in the United States, you are a citizen. But in the middle of that is this maddening clause where it says, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Those 6 words have been a roaring debate since the 14th Amendment was ratified. What does that mean? There are many people who argue that it means that if you are not here legally, you cannot claim citizenship for your children or progeny. So the Trump administration here seems to be playing 2 different strategies here. One is to get this into court early. They did everything but drive these people to the court to challenge them. It's clear the Trump administration wants to be in court as quickly as possible. That's going to allow this to go through the system, ultimately to the Supreme Court. But keep in mind, in 2 years we have midterm elections. And both the legislation in this case are going to force Democrats to side unequivocally with birthright citizenship, something that is unpopular with many voters.
Hey, John, we just got about a minute left here, but the 14th Amendment was passed in the wake of the Civil War and the Dred Scott decision, which denied citizenship to former slaves. This was to remedy that. And who could have back then in the 1860s foreseen the problem that we are going to have with illegal immigration today and people coming over here literally as for citizenship tourism?
Well, that was the point of some of the original figures involved in this language. They said that those 6 words were really about guaranteeing that freed slaves would be recognized as citizens, but they said that would not apply to foreigners who are coming into the country illegally. It would apply to citizens and lawful residents. But there were others at that time who disagreed with that interpretation. The Supreme Court seems to have rejected it in a couple of cases, but those are rather dated, and this court might want to take a new look at it.
All right. Well, I assume that they ultimately will. Professor, thank you for joining us, kicking us off today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Sandra?
Wow, all right. Southern California is facing fresh wildfire threats. Look at these live images coming to us right now. These are the live pictures of the Laguna fire in Ventura County. This one broke out in just the last 90 minutes. Wow. Meanwhile, thousands still under evacuations due to the Hughes fire. Jonathan Hunt is live from the scene of that fire. Jonathan, these are incredible images coming into us right now out of Camarillo, California.
Yeah, that's a newish fire that broke out earlier this morning. Those live pictures you're getting there, and it always looks extraordinary in the early going here. They do have air assets, I believe, that are being brought in to tackle that. Here in Castaic, as you come to us live, the winds have picked up, Sandra, quite significantly over the last couple of hours, and as a result, we're getting new flare-ups here. You're looking across Castaic Lake here. You can see the smoke cloud above that, and we have been watching over the last few hours, and we have some video we can show you of a quite remarkable air attack against that flare-up that we've watched again and again as 2 Super Scooper airplanes have been dipping down onto the lake here, picking up a load of water. They contact the lake for about 15 seconds. They fill up those planes, and then again and again those pilots have done round after round knocking down those flames, and they've made a very significant inroads here as you see those that smoke cloud, which was pretty significant just 30 minutes ago. They've knocked it down quite considerably now. There are a couple of helicopters still doing drops. Hard to make those out from the distance we are at here. We've also had a couple of the DC-10s, the huge LATs, as they call them, large aircraft tankers flying overhead. They look as though they've decided now that they do not need those, but although as I look at that now, I see another plume of black smoke beginning to come up. That would indicate that there are new flames erupting over there. So that is the one fortunate thing, Sandra, is as you look at the live picture here, that is across the sort of non-residential side of Castaic Lake. Yesterday, we saw those huge flames roaring towards thousands of homes in the city of Castaic. A lot of people there still remaining under evacuation orders today just because these winds are picking up so strongly. Everybody is taking the evacuation orders very seriously indeed, given what has happened over the last couple of weeks here in the LA area. We had another fire pick up last night, the Sepulveda fire. That, for a moment, was pretty close to the famed Getty Center and a lot of high-end homes in the Bel Air neighborhood of Los Angeles. But again, air assets were brought in because the winds weren't strong enough to keep them grounded, and those air assets are so significant in the early going in these firefights. They were able to stop the forward progress of the Sepulveda fire. But you're now, if you want to go back to the live pictures of the Laguna fire, that is a pretty intense fight right now. And here in Castaic, they are still battling as these winds pick up once again. And we're in a red flag warning now, Sandra, until this evening. So nobody is dropping their guard. This is still an intense fight. Also, just of note, President Trump is due to visit the area tomorrow afternoon. He is going to tour the areas which were so horribly destroyed in the Palisades and Eaton fires. It'll be interesting to see what President Trump has to say. He has had a lot of criticism, of course, about the preparation and preparedness of California. So we will see what President Trump says, and if indeed he meets with California Governor Gavin Newsom. Interesting to watch those pictures and words tomorrow, Sandra.
Absolutely. As more evacuation orders and warnings are underway right now, as we've taken these live images, Jonathan Hunt, we thank you for your reporting from the ground there. John.
Sure. All right. This is Sandra. I think we're going to go to somebody from the Los Angeles County Fire Department. Sandra?
He is joining us now, Fred Fielding. Fred, thank you very much for joining us. You come to us from the Los Angeles County Fire Department. What can you tell us about this new fire?
So that new fire is going to be in Ventura, so they're going to be handling that. I'm here at the Hughes fire. That right now, the acreage is at 10,176 acres with 14% containment. We really fought it aggressively both during the day yesterday and throughout the night. We're trying to get ahead of it as much as we can because there's still a red flag until tomorrow morning, and these fuels, the vegetation here is primed for fire. So we got to make sure we act very aggressively to make sure we contain the risk of these fires right now.
Fred, can I circle back on that? It's a little bit hard to hear you, but we want to hear every word. On the Hughes fire, you're reporting that that's 10,000, how many acres right now burning?
10,176 acres.
Wow. Okay, and you've got 14% containment. How confident are you that you'll be able to continue to make progress on that?
We're very confident that we're going to keep continuing progress here. Any tactical opportunities when the wind dies down, we get the fire running through light grassy fuels, that gives us more tactical opportunities than when it's in old growth vegetation, these very heavy energy dense fuels. So anytime that happens, we're going to act very aggressively in partnership with our unified command members here to make sure we keep this thing as small as possible, because the danger of letting it get out of the box that we've created is just too high.
Just looking at the proximity here, obviously these pictures out of Camarillo, California, you're talking northwest of the Los Angeles area, Ventura County. We're watching the very early stages of this. As our reporter Jonathan Hunt just noted, when these get going, these images can just really stun you. We're watching live pictures right now. Can you give us any update on what you're hearing about this fire here out of Camarillo?
I'm not actually hearing anything yet because I've been doing interviews about the Hughes, but I can tell you about the conditions of the fuels. So the fuels right now are exceptionally dry, and there's a lot of them. In 2023 and 2024, we had 200% and 150% of the normal precipitation. That created a lot of grasses. Those grasses act as kindling. That's where a fire starts. In addition, if it gets into old growth vegetation, those are the thicker chaparrals, and that has a lot of energy in it. So the kindling, if that starts, it gets into those really thick, energy-dense fuels. And when you add the additional factor of these Santa Ana winds blowing here at upwards of 40 miles an hour,
Wow.
it's a recipe for explosive fire growth.
We're looking at these aerial images. Obviously, the weather's everything right now as far as containing this. Real quickly, morale of the firefighters who have been at this for so long.
The morale is super high. This is what we want to do. We want to be containing fires and protecting our communities. These guys are tired. They've been working for the past 2 weeks, but their heads are held high because they're doing great work out here.
Fred, we appreciate you joining us. Our best to you, and thank you for what you do, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me finish. You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans. Right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially.
The Trump administration preparing to put a stop to what critics say is risky virus research. Will that stop another pandemic? We'll talk to Senator Rand Paul coming up later. Plus this.
They say that there's light shining all over the world since the election, and even countries that we aren't particularly friendly with are happy because they understand what there is a future and how great the future will be. Under our leadership, America is back and open for business.
Open for business, and the now hiring sign is up. 1,300 jobs filled so far, so who is getting them? The man overseeing it all at the White House will be joining us live next.
What the world has witnessed in the past 72 hours is nothing less than a revolution of common sense. Our country will soon be stronger, wealthier, and more united than ever before. My administration is acting with unprecedented speed to fix the disasters we've inherited from a totally inept group of people and to solve every single crisis facing our country.
President Trump promoting his plans to create a strong, wealthy, and united country to world leaders earlier today. All this as the Trump administration sets hiring records with 1,300 staff members in a single day. The man in charge of that task joins us now. Let's bring in Sergio Gore, Assistant to the President and Director of Presidential Personnel. Sergio, welcome to you and glad to have you on the program. So how's this gone so far? Pretty quickly, I guess we could assume.
It's been an incredible experience. Look, personnel is policy, and the president has a very clear policy to make America great again. We are delivering on that. We've had thousands, tens of thousands of people that have applied that want to join this administration. As you mentioned, we have set a record at 1,300 people that we were able to bring in on day one. We're continuing. It's been an absolutely incredible experience. And look, we have to deliver. The American people gave the president a clear mandate, and we will deliver on that mandate.
Sergio, it's good to see you again, and thank you for coming on. When the president was on the Joe Rogan podcast during the campaign last year, he said this about hiring at the White House.
The biggest mistake I made was I picked some people. I picked some great people, but you don't think about that. I picked some people that I shouldn't have picked. I picked a few people that I shouldn't have picked. And neocons? Yeah, neocons, or bad people, or disloyal people.
So far you've installed 1,300 people. You've got, I think, a total of 4,000 people that you've got to put in there at the White House. That's a lot of vetting to do, not just qualifications, but according to the president, also what they're thinking and what they may or may not do in the months and years ahead.
Absolutely, and we have an incredible team that has been doing that vetting. We are interviewing every single one of these individuals. If you are working in the federal government in a political appointee position, that comes through the White House now. And so we're very much hands-on. As you have seen with our picks, we have some extraordinary picks. The president is very hands-on. We meet pretty much every day on some of these bigger hires. And you've seen the American people react to that. Senator Marco Rubio, who's now our incredible Secretary of State, got confirmed with 99 votes. We expect additional nominees to get confirmed this week. The picks have been stellar, from Kristi Noem to Pete Hegseth, I know one of your former colleagues. The American people are very happy with those results.
Sergio, from the very top hires all the way down to some of your lower level staffers, what would you say is a common theme on the hiring? Is there a particular question you ask anybody you're bringing into the White House?
Look, we want to make sure people are going to deliver on the mandate the American people gave, right? And so that mandate includes making sure that we have a safe and secure border, that we have a great economy, that we have a foreign policy that makes America great again. What are we doing to look out for the American people? And that is the first thing. You have to deliver on the president's promises. Promises made, promises kept.
So how do you find out that particular person is the one for the job?
Look, we interviewed them, we checked their references, we've seen what they've done in the past, what have they done in previous campaigns, what they've done in previous jobs. We do have a vetting process. In addition to that, the president has been very clear of who he doesn't want to include in this administration. And so those are clear guidelines that we adhere to, and we bring the best people possible into the White House and into every department across this land.
So in his first term in office, the president was repeatedly torpedoed by people who were buried deep within some of these agencies, and some not so deep as well. I mean, one of the most famous torpedoes came from a guy named Miles Taylor, who was the chief of staff to Kirstjen Nielsen at the Department of Homeland Security, who famously penned an op-ed under the title of Anonymous. How do you prevent people like that from coming into your administration?
You make an incredible point, John. I mean, we're hiring incredible people in large amounts. On the flip side of that is we're also cleaning house. And so we started the process of terminating a lot of positions. We're cleaning house on boards and commissions in the government. DOJ has done an exceptional job. The hiring freeze in place is enabling us to vet new people coming in into other positions also. But you have to clean house. Look, it's one of those things. NSC declared yesterday they're not holding holdovers from the Biden era. So one of the mistakes that has happened previously is administration to administration will keep people that have burrowed in. We're not doing that. We're avoiding that. It's time for a fresh start, and America deserves the best.
Okay. So can you give us an update on the total hires so far now?
I think we're over 1,300. We have a lot of people coming in for a lot of big interviews, and everyone from administrators in various agencies to ambassadors to executive assistants at the Department of Interior. Everybody goes through this office. We want the best of the best. What we don't have a shortage is candidates. It has been incredible to see the level of people that want to join this administration, outsiders, CEOs, people outside of the swamp. We want to be able to deliver on the mandate for the president. And in order to do that, we have to hire the best.
So anybody out there who's thinking of applying to the White House, what's in store for them in terms of workload? And I ask this question because at the same time as you're hiring all these folks for the administration, progressive staffers on Capitol Hill are pushing for a 32-hour work week. So what's in store for people who join the administration?
It's absolutely incredible what you're seeing here versus what you're seeing in some other offices. The work day here starts very early and ends very late. And yet there's always more work to be done. We've only been here for 4 days. The president is an exceptionally hard worker. As you've seen, he's been going nonstop through inauguration, through day one. The record executive orders that he signed on day one, on day two, and many more to come. As you mentioned earlier, he's traveling to California this weekend. It is a nonstop pace to deliver for the American people.
Safe to say there's no work from home positions being offered?
There are no work from home positions. We want everybody to be in the office 5, 6, even 7 days a week. Elon was asking me about the possibility of sleeping in the office, and we're working on that too.
He's famous for doing that. I guess the only work from home position is the president, right?
Correct, and I'll tell you this, he's nonstop working. I mean, he's down here working in the morning, and he's one of the latest workers out of the office.
All right.
So it is a nonstop. People know his energy and his level of dedication, so some people might have a hard time keeping up with him, but nobody's going to outwork our president.
That is quite evident. Sergio, come back soon. Good to have you.
Sergio.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, see you again soon. And on now to a Fox News alert. The hearing for Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship is now over in Seattle. Judge Cooner slamming Trump's birthright citizenship executive order as a, quote, blatantly unconstitutional order. So that's from the judge himself. So you can imagine, Sandra, how he's likely going to rule on that, tipping his hat or his hand, I think, in terms of where he is actually going with this. So that would probably then be appealed to a court of appeal, and then would likely go up to the Supreme Court. And as we were talking with Jonathan Turley earlier, that was likely the plan all along, to get this before a 6-3 Supreme Court and see if the president can get a ruling in his favor.
Yeah. Okay, so you just came in here on the news that we just got word that this judge is blocking President Trump's order to curtail that, really slamming his decision to do so. And just for bringing anybody in on that, this would obviously be the legal principle enshrined in the Constitution Constitution that automatically makes anyone born within the U.S. or its territories a citizen. We've heard lots of different legal takes and opinions on this. We're getting Jonathan Turley up here to react in just a few moments. But this was one of his initial moves. I mean, you have to think we're just still a few days from him being sworn into office, John.
Yeah, and you know, this is part of the 14th Amendment. It's the very beginning of the 14th Amendment that says that all persons who are born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are American citizens. And what has been argued over for decades is this idea of subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And does that apply to people who come into this country illegally? It does not apply to people who are citizens of other sovereign nations who might work here as diplomats, or maybe they're working for that country's military. You can't have a child in this country and that child becomes an American citizen. That child remains a citizen of the home country. But the big question has been whether or not it applies to people who are in this country illegally. David Spunts at the Justice Department has been looking into this decision. This is obviously headed for a court of appeals, David, I would think.
Absolutely. A very quick hearing. We do expect the Justice Department to appeal. The Justice Department made clear pretty early on that it was implementing President Trump's agenda as we wait for people to come out from the State Attorney General's office in the state of Washington and also potentially the Department of Justice. It's not clear if the DOJ lawyer that was in the courtroom arguing will come out too. We'll probably hear from the AG's office in the state of Washington because they have won this first round. And I say it's a first round of many because, as you mentioned, this is likely heading for an appeals court. But this brings us back to the entire conversation about actually making a change to birthright citizenship. It's in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is from 1868, 3 years after the Civil War ended, during a period of Reconstruction. And as you mentioned, those 6 words, that's what the Justice Department is hanging on right now. If they lose at the Supreme Court, assuming this does go to the Supreme Court, then there's a conversation about potentially amending the U.S. Constitution. And amending the U.S. Constitution is a difficult process. It takes 2/3 approval in both the House and the Senate and 75% or 3/4 of all the state legislatures. So a lot of different moving parts here. But the bottom line is that this judge was not persuaded by any means by the Justice Department to keep this executive order in play. John?
David, if you could stay with us and jump in as you get any news. Jonathan Turley is joining us with the breaking news that we just heard this judge is blocking the birthright citizenship executive order that came from the president in his first days of office. Jonathan, your reaction here.
Well, this is along the lines of what we just discussed on the air, that this is the most vulnerable executive order of all of those issued by President Trump. The widespread expectation was this result. The Trump administration knew that. There's every indication that the Trump administration invited a challenge because they want to get into the courts in order to eventually make it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can, of course, change the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, although I would still say that that is unlikely. But I think that what you're really seeing playing out here is a dual legal and political strategy. Frankly, I think that the Trump administration views this as winning either way. That is, to the extent that it forces Democrats to oppose the legislation in Congress, to oppose this effort in court, it plays well with a large number of citizens who don't agree with birthright citizenship. People should realize that we're in the minority on this. Most of our close allies in Europe, most of the world, does not recognize birthright citizenship. So I think you're seeing both a legal and political strategy playing out.
So this was tested in the courts. It was a long time ago. It was back in 1898, the case of Wong Kim Ark, who was son of Chinese parents. He was born in San Francisco. Under the 14th Amendment, he would have qualified under the original interpretation as a citizen of the United States. He went to visit his parents in China. Then when he came back, he was denied entry. But the Supreme Court decided in favor of him. So that's, I guess, since then, it's been determined that anybody who is in this country who's not working as a diplomatic attaché or something like that, or working diplomatically for an embassy, if they have a child in the United States, that child is an American citizen. But getting back to your point, when you look at that affirmation of the 14th Amendment provision in 1898 and this idea that, well, maybe they don't need a constitutional amendment, can the Supreme Court simply clarify what they believe is the intention of the 14th Amendment, Jonathan?
Yes, they can. I mean, the thing is, the case that you mentioned, people who challenge birthright citizenship point out that the Chinese parents were lawfully here. No one is challenging the idea that the children of citizens or lawful residents can have this claim. But yes, the Supreme Court can adopt an alternative interpretation of those 6 key words. What do they mean? And there may be some justices who are inclined to do that. But this has been the longstanding precedent that the Supreme Court has followed. So it was virtually impossible that the Trump administration could prevail in the lower courts because they would feel bound by this case law. Now, the question about head counting on the Supreme Court makes this rather difficult. I think that there might be some justices who are interested in re-examining those 6 words and what they mean and not effectively reading them out of the amendment. But I also think that what these justices are going to be really influenced by is that there was a division of opinion at the time this was passed. Some of the people at that time said that it did not allow birthright citizenship, while others said that it did. And I think that you might find some conservative justices inclined to stay with that approach. Justices like John Roberts, who tends to be an incrementalist, tends to be much more conservative on these types of questions.
All right, Professor, stand by with us if you would. We want to bring in our Fox News legal editor, Carrie Urban, to weigh in on all of this. I imagine this was expected by the Trump administration, one step closer to the Supreme Court, which I assume is where they wanted this thing to go.
Yes, I think that's right, or they wouldn't have put it out the way they did. And I think the ultimate goal, as you've been saying, Professor Turley has been saying, is to get it there. Of course, the Supreme Court is under no obligation to take it up if and when it gets to them, but it's certainly a fascinating legal issue, especially when you consider the context of the 14th Amendment, particularly the clause and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You know, the senator who wrote that clause at the time gave speeches about it and specifically said it did not include aliens. And so that was the understanding for many, many years as to who that clause applied to. As far as people naturalized or born in the United States, it did not include aliens. And it wasn't until the case that you were just talking about earlier, the decision that came down in 1898, that changed. But even in that case, John, the justices there emphasized the fact that the Chinese national at issue, that his parents in the United States had been, quote, permanently domiciled in the United States for quite some time. And of course, the context in that case is that it was at a time of high anti-Chinese sentimentism, and there was the Chinese Exclusion Act and the like, so it was virtually impossible for Chinese nationals to become citizens. So there are ways, I think, to distinguish what's going on now, say, with birth tourism and the like, with what happened, you know, in 1898, for instance.
Carrie, just to remind everybody, President Trump first proposed this in his first term. And we know how that ended up. Why would the president think that this time will be different, and how are they approaching it differently?
Well, I think, one, the makeup of the court is different. And two, it's an issue that still needs, I think, that the fact that legal scholars on both sides of the aisle, and you have mixed opinions, by the way, within the Republican camp and the Democrat camp on this, but it's been debated now for over 100 years, means that it's something that may, in fact, need to, you know, just have the Supreme Court take another look at it. And again, given the fact that in 1898, for instance, when this decision came down and birthright citizenship was born, there was no such thing as birth tourism, something that we saw explode in 2015 under the Obama administration. And so that's a very different set of facts, culture, and time than we were dealing with then, which makes, you know, which makes it possible that they could look at it now and perhaps come to a different conclusion.
So just one more quick point on what you said. Because Wong Kim Ark's parents were permanently domiciled here in the United States, it was deemed that he, in fact, was an American citizen because he was born here. Many of the people who've come across the border illegally have been paroled into the United States. So they're here on some sort of, I don't want to say legal basis because that might confer more than intended, but they've been permitted to be in the country. So does that change things for them?
But this is why I think it's a potentially ripe issue for the Supreme Court to look at, because a lot of things have changed. I mean, if you take a look, even at the retired judge, a very well-known judge, Richard Posner, Seventh Circuit, you know, he says, for instance, or has said many times that the 14th Amendment does not confer this citizenship status on people who are here illegally. That was not being considered at the time because, again, the Chinese nationals who were here were technically here illegally, but they couldn't become citizens. So it's a different situation now, and that's why I think it continues to be a fascinating legal issue that's debated.
All right, and it's going to continue for weeks to come as well. All right, thank you, Carrie. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
All right, any moment now, the Senate is expected to vote on the confirmation of John Ratcliffe for CIA director, and he might be the only one for today. And we're getting breaking news right now on Pete Hegseth and his nomination. Senior national correspondent Aisha Hasty has that news from Capitol Hill for us. Aisha, what are we learning?
Hi, Sandra. Just moments ago, Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski announced on X that she will not be supporting Pete Hegseth for this confirmation vote that is scheduled for, we believe it will happen tomorrow late in the day sometime. She says this, she put out a really lengthy statement. And she says that his past behaviors, including infidelity on multiple occasions, it demonstrates a lack of judgment, she says, that is unbecoming of someone who would lead our armed forces. She also talks about how these behaviors for men and women in the uniform, they are held to a higher standard and they would be held accountable for such actions, and they deserve leaders, she says, who uphold these same standards. So she is out, Murkowski. We're also keeping a close eye on Senators Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins. They could also be no votes, and that would mean that Vice President J.D. Vance would have to come down here to Capitol Hill and break a tie. Again, that is if 3 Republicans wind up voting no on Pete Hegseth. In the meantime, we can't get to Pete Hegseth until we get a confirmation vote for CIA Director nominee John Ratcliffe, and that is finally going to happen today because Democrats are basically jamming up the Senate floor right now, applying this 30-hour debate rule on every single nominee. And if that is the case, then, Sandra, we're going to be here not just weekdays, we're going to be here weekends, you name it. I actually got to talk to Democrat leader Chuck Schumer about this. I pressed him on what his plans are, and here's what he told me. Watch.
On the nominees that do have Democratic support, bipartisan support, because there are some, like John Ratcliffe, do you support Chris Murphy slowing this confirmation process down, and do you think that's going to happen with other bipartisan?
I have some doubts about Mr. Ratcliffe, so I think it's for a day or two or a few hours to examine these nominees who have such power thoroughly. Absolutely, absolutely.
So remember, Sandra, the Senate floor is kind of like a one-track train station. The next train or the next nominee can't come in if the first one doesn't leave. So we're expecting Ratcliffe today, Pete Hegseth later Friday night, Kristi Noem sometime Sunday. It's going to be a drip, drip, drip. Now, President Trump, Sandra, could try to trigger those recess appointments, but it would come with a cost. Number one, it would blow up the Senate's advise and consent process that's been going on since the birth of our country. And number two, recess appointments are temporary, and right now, senators, even Trump's closest allies, are not keen on it. But that breaking news just moments ago, Pete Hegseth has officially lost at least one Republican Senate vote. Back to you.
Yeah, and that's Lisa Murkowski. And also to add to all of this, Aisha, Senate Majority Leader John Thune says a full Senate confirmation vote for Treasury nominee Bessent will be hopefully over the weekend. Aisha, thank you very much for all of that. We'll see you again soon. John.
All right, let's dig deeper on this, Sandra. Bring in former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor Ari Fleischer, who joins us now. So I talked to Pete Hegseth on last Friday night. I think he assumed that he was going to lose Murkowski, maybe Collins, and one other. He said he believes he's got 50 votes, which would require J.D. Vance to cast a tiebreaker. But he's still confident that he'll get confirmed. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that is exactly the right number and the right math. When you listen and you hear what people inside are saying, he likely will lose 3. I think Mitch McConnell of Kentucky is the third vote that people believe is going to be lost. Will he pick up any Democrats? That'll be interesting. But if it's 50-50, the interesting thing about being confirmed by the Senate, John, is nobody remembers what the tally was. They just remember you were confirmed and then the type of job you did. So he needs the 50. I think that's exactly the number he'll get.
Fair enough. I mean, this is happening fast, all of these picks, as we watch the process. Ari, how would you describe that so far?
Well, you know, when I look at the Trump transition, Sandra, I actually view it more as an acceleration than a transition. Donald Trump has got his foot on the gas. After 4 years of having his foot removed from the gas pedal, he knows what he wants to do, how to do it, and he's being even more aggressive and assertive than he would have been had he won in 2020 and would have been a continuation into his second term. So I think the key thing here is for Senate Majority Leader John Thune to fulfill his promise, keep the Senate in long hours at night and over the weekend. They have got to get these nominations through, and if the Democrats are delaying, not for the purpose of having an examination of more information, it is delay for delay's sake. John Thune has got to muscle it through with all speed and make these guys work all weekend long.
All right, so let's put it up on the screen here. You can see that 12 nominees have been voted out of committee, yet only one, Senator Marco Rubio, has received confirmation. That was on a 99-0 unanimous vote. The delay in the request for the 30-hour rule, or the invocation of the 30-hour rule, came from Senator Chris Murphy. And he invoked it over the Ratcliffe nomination, which came out of committee with bipartisan support. Ratcliffe was a member of Congress. Here's what the Senate Majority Leader John Thune said about the delay. Listen here.
He says senators need time for a full, real debate. But a handful of Democrats want to play politics with this nominee.
You know, with the exception of maybe Hegseth, if he loses 2 more Republicans, might not make it across the finish line. But it absolutely looks like the rest of them will. So why delay?
Well, that's the point. This is not about good governance. This is about opposing Donald Trump. This is about Democrats being able to go home and say, I did everything in my power to use the rules of the Senate to slow it down, to stop it, and then they get hailed as heroes from the far left. Our nation is too busy for that right now. Presidents deserve to get their people in place, and if you oppose their policies, that's fine, oppose their policies. But allow the president to fill out his team. That is the normal tradition. That is normally what happens. And these are nothing but delaying tactics for no good government purposes.
Yeah. Just a heads up, we are told that the Senate just started voting on Ratcliffe. That's a live look there at Capitol Hill right now. We will obviously be watching for that and bring you the latest from there as we learn it. All right, Ari, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ari.
Okay, so we'll keep watching that. Meanwhile, President Trump delivering his first major speech to world leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Let's bring in Robert Wolf, a former economic advisor to President Obama, and Steve Moore, an economic advisor for the current Trump administration. Thank you very much to both of you for being here. I have a lot to ask you about. First up, this is some of what we heard from Trump on that world stage at the Economic Forum. Listen.
What the world has witnessed in the past 72 hours is nothing less than a revolution of common sense. From the moment I took office, I've taken rapid action to reverse each and every one of these radical left policies that created this calamity. I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord and ended the insane and costly electric vehicle mandate. I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world. We have saved free speech in America, and we've saved it strongly with another historic executive order. Finally, as we restore common sense in America, we're moving quickly to bring back strength and peace and stability abroad. I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. which is what it should have been years ago.
A very firm message to the world he is sending there, Steve. I want to get your reaction to that. He talked about common sense, taking on the radical left and their policies, even talked about interest rates and bringing them down, something many in America are dealing with right now and hope to see happen. How would you characterize that message he was sending to world leaders?
Well, it was an America First agenda and speech. And by the way, just to look at the look on the faces of many of these EU bureaucrats, they weren't too happy about this. But I think that was an agenda. I bet my friend Robert Wolf, who's a Democrat, but I believe a common sense Democrat, probably agrees with a lot of what Donald Trump says. Now, I have to say this: the president does not have the authority to bring interest rates down. Interest rates are set by the market, not by the president or politicians. But all of these other things, pulling America out of the climate change agenda, ending the Green New Deal programs, putting America first when it comes to production of energy, asking other countries to step up and help in the national defense of the world. I think those are all very positive things, and that's what Trump was elected to do.
Robert, your name was invoked.
Yeah, so I agree a lot with what Steve said. I'm going to bite my tongue. But listen, he made it clear on the world stage that there's a new boss in town. And he really went after everyone. He went after Moynihan and Jamie Dimon of the big banks on not doing business with conservative companies. I'm not sure if that's fact or fiction. He went after OPEC. He went right after Saudi on making sure they supply more oil so oil prices go down. He went after NATO to get 5% on defense, even though we don't spend near 5% on defense. He went after the Fed, you could argue, and central banks around the world to lower.
You like what you're
interest
hearing,
rates.
Robert?
Here's what I would say, and I kind of tweeted this out. I mean, today's Wall Street Journal or yesterday's talked about where economists and business people see interest rates. They see interest rates going higher. They see a predominant number of President Trump's plan are inflationary. Whether it's tariffs or protectionism. This is what the economists said, and they think also GDP is going to go up. So they think we're going to have a stronger economy, but also it's going to increase inflation. So this idea of rates coming down, we're not seeing that.
Well, we're not seeing that. We're 3 days in.
No, we're not seeing that trend, though. That's all, right?
All right.
I mean, if you looked at the last employment numbers and the last CPI numbers, it was a bit of a...
Steve, give us a final thought.
Yeah, look, I am worried about inflation, and Trump has to bring inflation down, Sandra, because that was one of the major reasons that he got elected. People are so tired of going to the grocery store and seeing prices rise. But here's my final thought. He was talking to all these EU bureaucrats. The American economy has been so much stronger over the last decade or two than the European economies. They would be well advised to adopt the American model of economic freedom and move away from socialism, which has not worked in Europe.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Let's give it some time, and then we'll continue to digest it as it happens. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Sorry, we're a little short on time today. All right.
Thanks.
John?
Sandra, the Trump administration's mass deportation efforts in full swing, and Fox News got exclusive access to embed with ICE's elite team in the sanctuary city of Boston, obtaining the first images of some very big arrests. Retired NYPD Inspector Paul Morrow reacts, coming up next.